There's a place in the American Southwest where the ground looks like it belongs on another planet. White sand that runs to the horizon and never burns underfoot. Stone bent into shapes like a city left out to melt. Black fields of rock so sharp the land itself seems to warn you off. This is New Mexico. The ground here is impossibly old, and it still gives up creatures that died before the first flower ever bloomed. Hidden inside its lava is ice that has never melted. Frozen solid in a place where nothing frozen should survive. And rising out of the high desert are the largest stone ruins on the continent. A 1,000-year-old city, built with a precision no one has fully explained. Aligned so exactly with the sky that it still keeps time today. Then the people who built it vanished. And what they left behind points to something far darker than drought. This is New Mexico, and the strangest part hasn't even started yet. The Navajo named this place De Nazin, meaning cranes, after the birds willing to cross terrain no one else wanted. The formations were not shaped by rivers, but by collapsing layers of ancient seafloor, producing stone mushrooms, twisted spires, and capped hoodoos that look, from a distance, like a city that melted. Underneath sits one of the densest dinosaur fossil beds in the southwest, and a visitor can accidentally kick open a fossil sealed in rock since before the first flowering plant existed. The clay soil is hard as pavement, when dry and boot-pulling mud, within minutes of rain, which is partly why no settlement ever held here, despite the fossil wealth sitting just below the surface. Temperatures swing more than 60 degrees between a single day and night, and reliable water sits miles out, turning every attempt at habitation into a lesson the land only had to teach once. When silver was found in the mountains, men went anyway, and Mogollon became the kind of town that everyone knew would not last. The settlement clung to slopes so steep that buildings sat on stilts. The single road was barely wide enough for one wagon, and trouble always arrived before supplies did. Floods tore through repeatedly, fires burned sections flat, and winter sealed the camp off entirely, yet men kept coming back because the ore was worth the punishment. Disease did more damage than the mountain itself, filling the cemetery faster than towns 3 times its size, and sometimes taking entire work crews within weeks. Even at peak production, it never looked permanent. Buildings leaning, streets staying narrow, the whole place quietly aware it was borrowed ground. What the ore camps left behind was silence, and the cliffs at Ghost Ranch that replaced them do not threaten so much as simply refuse to move. Those walls of red and yellow rise so cleanly from the valley floor that painters, geologists and filmmakers have been arguing over who gets to claim them ever since. The name came from a legend about brujos, which is said to haunt the canyon at night, convincing enough that early ranchers avoided the area entirely and left it undivided long enough to become one of the most painted places in the Southwest. Beneath those cliffs, hundreds of nearly complete dinosaur skeletons were found stacked on top of each other, and scientists still have no clear answer for what killed them all at once. Somewhere in the rock and shadow above the valley, a puma is almost certainly watching the same ridgeline the painters once faced. It does not chase prey like most predators do, but follows for up to an hour, closing in near silence before launching from a position so precise the deer has no time to react. Rarely finishing a kill in one sitting, it covers the carcass with dirt and returns over several days, so a single deer can sustain one cat for nearly 2 weeks. It holds territory up to 150 square miles, marked with physical scrapes at key points, small dirt mounds that other cats read and respond to, like a boundary fence only they can see. Females teach cubs to hunt over nearly 2 years, then drive them out completely, sometimes within a single day. Young males pushed out have been tracked crossing highways and turning up in places with no obvious food or shelter, because going back is simply not an option. The broken rock that makes this country good hunting ground gives way to something quieter further on, where pale stone cones rise in tight clusters, pressed into shape by ash, wind and water. Each cone at Kasha Katwe is topped with a harder cap that shields the softer material below from washing away. Between them, narrow slot canyons were cut not slowly, but by flash floods that still rip through today, with enough force to move boulders. Temperatures inside those passageways drop sharply, and the Cochiti Pueblo people recognise this long before scientists ever measured it, which is partly why they still hold legal authority over the site. Once a capstone falls, the formation below disappears within years, not centuries. Further north, people cut entire communities directly into the cliff walls at Puye. Rooms were stacked along nearly a mile of cliff face, housing over 1,500 people at its peak. Entry was not by stairs, but by hand-cut toeholds that children and elders used daily without hesitation. Every room absorbed the heat during the day and released it slowly at night, keeping interiors steady through summer extremes and winter freezes. Within a single generation, the site was abandoned, likely driven by drought, yet Santa Clara Pueblo descendants still perform ceremonies there today. To the northeast, a single volcanic cone rises alone above the grasslands, and Capulin served as the only fixed point travellers had to navigate by for centuries. Built not from flowing lava, but from cinders and ash hurled out in repeated bursts, it piled into a near-perfect cone that looks from a distance like someone dropped a mountain and forgot to flatten it. Rising 1,000 feet above the surrounding grasslands, it can be seen for over 100 miles on a clear day. At its base, hardened lava flows created broken, nearly uncrossable ground that kept the area open long after the region was settled, giving pronghorn and mule deer unusually large corridors of undisturbed movement. Standing on the crater rim, 4 states are visible, a view so useful that early railroad surveyors used it as a fixed reference point when mapping routes through otherwise featureless terrain. Two separate groups once tried to claim the same valley at the same time, and the ruins of both are still standing side by side at Jemez Historic Site. One of the longest continuously occupied Pueblo settlements in New Mexico once filled this valley, where people lived, stored food, and held ceremonies for centuries before outside contact began. When Spanish missionaries arrived, they built not beside the existing stone pueblo, but directly on top of portions of it, using the same stone and the same ground. What they raised was one of the largest mission churches on the entire Spanish colonial frontier, yet it was burned and abandoned during the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, one of the most successful indigenous rebellions in North American history. After the Spanish returned, the Jemez people never resettled this specific site, and both the Pueblo walls and the collapsed church still stand exactly as they were, each one a record of what the other displaced. Most people who encountered El Mal Pais simply turned around, a black lava field so hostile it never held a single permanent settlement. Its surface hardened into razor-edged folds sharp enough to shred leather boots in a single crossing, less like ground and more like a floor made of broken glass. Spanish explorers named it the Badlands, and most travellers went around it. Rainfall vanishes almost immediately into the porous rock, leaving the surface bone dry even after heavy storms. Yet just beneath the basalt, ice survives year-round in natural cold air chambers. Ancestral Pueblo people did cross it using a sandstone trail system along the edges that took generations to establish, treating the lava field as a natural boundary between competing groups. Below the surface, the rock is hollow in places, and the lava tubes running through it are unlike anything visible from above. Those passages formed when lava flows hardened on the outside while still draining away underneath, leaving empty corridors sealed inside solid basalt. Some hold ice year-round even when surface temperatures exceed 90 degrees, because cold air sinks into the chambers in winter and has no way out once warm weather seals the openings. temperatures drop dramatically within just a few feet of the entrance, so sudden that cave-adapted insects live their entire lives inside without ever experiencing daylight. Where ceilings collapsed into skylights, mosses and ferns grow in isolated patches surrounded entirely by dry lava, kept alive only by cold air venting upward from below. From Gallia Overlook, the true scale of what those tubes run beneath finally comes into view. The lava field spreads so wide from up here that its far edge disappears into the base of distant mesas. Older flows show patches of returning vegetation, while younger sections stay completely bare, making each eruption's history readable just by colour differences across the field. Ravens work the overlook edges deliberately, using updrafts off the sun-heated black rock to stay airborne without effort, and they are often the only visible wildlife over the lava itself. Somewhere directly below, sealed inside the rock, is a chamber of blue-green ice that has not melted in living memory, and the entrance at Bandera leads straight down to it. Step inside and the temperature drops immediately, holding around 31 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, while the desert above bakes in summer heat. Ice grows in layers each winter and never fully clears, and trapped within those layers are air bubbles and pollen records going back thousands of years. The cave works as a natural cold trap, where frigid winter air sinks in and stays, while summer heat rises and exits without displacing it. Back on the surface, one small bird treats this same hostile ground as prime real estate. Among the most cold-tolerant songbirds in North America, the horned lark breeds earlier than almost any other bird on the continent, sometimes while snow is still on the ground. Rather than perching, it runs along bare ground, where seeds and wind-blown debris collect in cracks. Those two small black feather tufts look less like horns and more like a tiny disapproving eyebrow, but they are raised during territorial display before any physical confrontation happens. The female builds a small pavement of pebbles beside the nest entrance, and the leading theory is that it helps her locate it quickly on otherwise featureless open ground. A human community made the same stubborn choice at Taos Pueblo, refusing to leave ground that most outsiders never understood the value of. Five stories of mud and timber, continuously occupied longer than most European cities have existed, it was built upward by design. Entry was through holes in the roof, accessed by ladders pulled up at night, turning the entire building into a self-locking structure with no ground floor doors at all. Its walls are never truly finished, as residents replaster them by hand every few years, keeping the same shape maintained by the same families across generations. At feast day celebrations, children perform traditional dances in full ceremonial dress, learning the same steps in the same plaza their grandparents did. Most of daily life happens behind walls tourists never cross, in spaces the community keeps entirely to itself. No running water or electricity exists inside the residential buildings by deliberate community choice, and the creek dividing the two main structures remains the only water source for those living within. For over 60 years, the US government held its sacred Blue Lake before returning it, marking one of the first times any government in North America restored land based purely on spiritual significance. Just steps away, San Jeronimo Chapel tells a shorter and far more violent version of the same story. What stands today is actually the fourth version, because each previous structure was destroyed, first by uprising, then by revolt, and finally by the US Army. Its original walls were raised entirely by forced native labour, the same people it was meant to convert being the ones who hauled the mud and built it. Unusually, the ruins of an earlier version still stand inside the cemetery next door, left visible on purpose as a permanent record of what happened there. What Silver and Greed built further south collapsed just as fast, and Shakespeare never even saw it coming. No record of itself exists from when it was alive, rising fast on silver money, burning bright with violence, and becoming a ghost before anyone thought to write it down. Two men were hanged from the rafters of the hotel dining room, not at a gallows but inside, mid-meal, because the town had no courthouse and nobody wanted to wait. Its silver was partly a scam, with early ore samples secretly laced with imported diamonds to pull in outside investors before the ground gave up its real worth. When the money dried up, the town simply stopped, leaving saloons and storefronts standing exactly as they were, as if everyone walked out one afternoon and never came back. Chaco Canyon operated on an entirely different scale, and nobody has fully agreed on why it too was abandoned. It holds the largest stone structures in North America, walked away from and left standing empty. Roads cut through the site are perfectly straight, up to 30 feet wide, crossing cliffs and open desert, and some led to absolutely nothing. All the timber used in construction was hauled from forests over 50 miles away by hand, with no wheels and no pack animals, tens of thousands of logs carried on human backs. One great house aligns so precisely with the sun that a single beam of light shines through a window onto a marked wall only on the winter solstice, a building-sized calendar that still works today. Evidence of cannibalism found at several sites points not to ritual, but to extreme social breakdown during a prolonged drought that pushed the entire network past its limits. One resident never left, and the Woodhouse's scrub jay has been claiming the stone ledges ever since. Loud, bold, and completely unbothered by the silence around it, it has worked these stone ledges and juniper branches for generations. What's strange is that it actively deceives its own kind, going back later to move a hidden food cache whenever it was caught being watched while hiding it. Surviving the canyon's bitter winters requires no migration, just a mental map of thousands of individually buried food caches recalled with unsettling accuracy months later. By dropping seeds across open ground, it plants far more trees than it ever intends to, and juniper has spread across large parts of this region because of it. A town further north also refused to disappear, though Grenville had far less reason to stay. Built on a single idea that the railroad would keep coming and the plains would keep filling with farms that needed a town, it never got what it was promised. When freight routes shifted, the building stayed intact, the bank vault still standing, as if everyone expected to return by morning. That vault outlasted every business that ever used it, sitting open on Main Street now, the most permanent thing left in a town that was supposed to be temporary. Near the point where three states meet, it was never the centre of anything, and the open plains to the south eventually give way to the Pine Mountains and volcanic canyons of Gila National Forest. It became the first officially designated wilderness on Earth, set aside not by government decree, but by a single ranger who wrote a proposal to his superiors and somehow convinced them to say yes. A cattle herd abandoned here in the 1970s never left, turned feral across the interior, eventually attacked hikers, and forced authorities into aerial culling, with carcasses left on site to decompose naturally. Geronimo and his warriors used these same canyons as cover for years, moving through terrain so broken that pursuing armies repeatedly lost them entirely. Tucked further into those canyon walls, rooms where people sheltered long before any of that conflict began, are still standing at the Gila cliff dwellings. Built by a group that arrived, constructed an entire village in the cliff wall, and then disappeared again in barely a lifetime, almost nothing is known about who they were. Inside, original roof beams still hold, soot still stains the ceilings, and old corn cobs still lie on the floors, as if the families walked out one season and never came back. That stay may have lasted only a few decades. Its canyon did half the engineering, as overhanging rock kept rooms dry, south-facing walls trapped winter sun, and the narrow approach made every visitor visible from above. Out on the open ridges above, the mountain bluebird hunts the clearings in a way that has more in common with a hawk than with most songbirds. Dropping straight down from exposed perches onto beetles and grasshoppers, it snaps back up to the same lookout to scan again. Old woodpecker holes in open clearings make ideal nesting spots, trading cover for long sight lines so it can spot threats early and get out before they arrive. Winter cold does not drive it from the high country, as flocks slide downslope to open pasture and sage, then follow the melting snowline back uphill. Higher up on the colder ridges, the Clark's Nutcracker runs a far more ambitious operation across the pine slopes. Pine ridges are its personal pantry, and it tears into cones and hauls out fat, rich seeds to bury across the slopes for later. Tens of thousands of seeds get cached in tiny soil pockets, then located again under snow, months later, using a mental map that almost never fails. Forgetting a fraction of those caches is exactly what the forest needs. Since entire hillsides of pine can grow from seeds it simply never comes back for. People applied the same logic of careful storage and planning to stone at Aztec ruins, building an entire community around storerooms and shared supply. More than 400 linked rooms wrap around plazas and ceremonial chambers here, built all at once for an entire community. The main kiva was rebuilt using original patterns, and the roof matches designs from Chaco Canyon, confirming that builders across sites were following the same plan. Macaw feathers, Pacific seashells, and traces of cacao have all been found inside these rooms, traded from places hundreds of miles away. The stonework alternates between thick and thin courses in a deliberate pattern, the same style used at other great houses across the region. Down the road, small highway settlements tried to build their future around passing cars and neon signs, then faded when faster routes pulled the traffic somewhere else. San Fidel was built around a road, and when that road stopped mattering, the whole town stopped with it. People here didn't leave when life got hard. They stayed, tending the same adobe homes and chili fields their grandparents worked. Green chili here isn't just an ingredient, but a personal identity, one that no bypass decision could erase. Whole sections of Route 66 were cut off by planners who never visited the towns they were quietly erasing, and San Fidel absorbed the silence and kept going. Past the edge of town, a river takes over that has been feeding farm communities long before any highway existed, running the full length of New Mexico. The Rio Grande cut through a crack in the Earth's crust that is still slowly pulling apart, with the canyon walls getting fractionally wider every year. For farming communities along its banks, this river was the entire calendar, dictating when to plant, when to flood the fields, and when to harvest, through irrigation channels so precise that some are still used by the same families who dug them. Certain southern portions have run dry in recent decades, not from drought alone, but because so many farms and towns pull from it upstream that almost nothing reaches the far end. Migratory birds use the corridor as a flyway, desert predators follow it for water, and beaver and otter communities survive here only because this strip holds when everything around it does not. Further north, the river narrows into one of the deepest volcanic gorges in the region. The basalt walls drop more than 800 feet straight down to the water. The Rio Grande Gorge opened along the same rift pulling apart beneath New Mexico, which is why it is geologically young and still growing. A steel bridge crosses it at the top, and for Taos, locals it is simply part of the commute, used daily by people hauling groceries who barely glance over the edge. Local communities eventually pushed to install crisis phones on the bridge railing after it became one of New Mexico's most visited suicide sites, a jarring detail on a structure most visitors stop to photograph. At river level, the basalt walls trap warmth in winter and shade in summer, which is why bighorn sheep work the ledges year-round, crossing vertical rock with a calm that makes the entire drop look optional. Once the walls open and cottonwoods line the bank again, a tropical kingbird appears, a bird whose natural range sits far to the south. It follows the river's corridor of trees and insects northward every warm season, pushing into territory the maps still call outside its range. Small but unusually aggressive, it launches directly at hawks and ravens several times its size, hitting them in the air and pushing them out without hesitation. Feeding runs like clockwork, fixed perch, locked target, mid-air catch, back to the same spot, repeated dozens of times an hour. Pairs nest close to wasp or bee colonies, using those insects as guards that keep larger predators away from the eggs without the parents lifting a feather. Come autumn, it pulls back south fast, making each seasonal visit feel less like a permanent arrival and more like a bold experiment that keeps working. Just up the road, the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge crosses the same canyon at a height that stops most visitors cold the first time they reach the railing. When it was finished, it held the record as the highest bridge in the US highway system, which makes it stranger that Taos locals treat it like a speed bump on the way to the store. Wind channels are hard enough to push cars sideways, and pedestrians grab the railing, not from fear of heights, but simply to stay on their feet. Base jumpers have stepped off and pulled parachutes inside the narrow canyon with maybe 4 seconds before hitting the river, basalt walls closing in on both sides. That same notoriety forced a long public debate about barriers and responsibility, one that made Taos residents confront what it means to have something this severe built into everyday life. East of the gorge, the plains open into the kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like something recently emptied out. Colmore was a rail depot that existed purely because freight stopped here. And the moment trains rerouted, merchants, teachers and families followed the tracks out and never came back. Nothing was demolished. The schoolhouse still stands with its roof caving in. Homes still hold furniture inside, and the whole place sits open to the weather like a town that forgot to fall down. The railroad wasn't just transport here, but the economy, the post office, and the social calendar. And one corporate decision quietly deleted an entire community without a public hearing or a formal goodbye. West of town, the ground never gave people a reason to stay either, and Archie Slepar Wilderness shows exactly why. One hard rain here erases tracks overnight and turns the ground to glue, and entire mushroom towers of soft clay can collapse in a single storm, with shapes able to change visibly within one season. Each stone cap protects only a thin stalk of clay beneath it, so once a cap breaks, the tower below it is gone before the next season. No reliable water, no shade, and almost no soil makes this visit-only country, where people walk the mounds, take photos, and go home to valleys where chili fields and cottonwoods make staying possible. Fossil hunters tell stories of a Pentaceratops skull pulled out of these badlands that ended up being one of the largest dinosaur skulls ever found in North America, almost 10 feet long from frill to nose. Locals warn that walking off trail after rain is a fast way to end a trip early, since hidden cracks in the wet clay have swallowed boots, hiking poles, and at least one camera tripod that nobody bothered to dig back out. It takes a particular kind of person to settle somewhere this unforgiving, and a small group of them have done it in Trementina, a place most maps barely register. A tiny cluster of homes and a church on the high plains, where a quick grocery run means hours on the road. People who stay choose this on purpose, trading streetlights for sky, running cattle on pastures so wide you count distance in gates, and buying supplies in bulk because the next run is never guaranteed. That small church handles weddings, funerals, potlucks and brandings planned over paper plates of red chili stew, making each gathering both a social lifeline and a strategy session for the next dry spell. The road eventually hands off to the Pecos wilderness, where the flat country is replaced entirely by cold lakes, spruce ridges, and mountain air that feels nothing like the plains below. Families from the valleys have treated these peaks as a summer escape for generations, driving up with coolers full of tortillas, green chili and beans, trading dust for campfires, and water so clear you can count the rocks on the bottom. Elk, bighorn, sheep and black bears use this high country the same way, climbing out of the hot basins to graze on open meadows, and dropping back down once winter closes the passes. Very old hunting camps sit right beside modern backpacking tracks, meaning the same meadows hikers use for weekend loops were once the exact places people depended on for meat, water, and safe travel between valleys. All that snowmelt flows back down to farms and acequias below, so the chili fields and orchards many New Mexicans call home run on water that started as snowflakes up here. Drop out of the trees and follow those streams toward Roy, a town that didn't disappear all at once, but went quiet one closed storefront at a time. An empty theatre marquee, closed gas pumps, and a few stubborn storefronts show what it looks like when a town doesn't collapse but just slowly thins out. People who stay are here by choice, trading big paychecks for long horizons, buying flour and green chili in bulk, and keeping the cafe going as much for talk as for food. It also held one of the last stops on a regional rail line tied to the Dawson coal trade, so when those mines shut down, the town lost not just its biggest customer, but its reason to be on the schedule at all. A handful of ranching families still work the surrounding mesas, hauling cattle south to market, on the same roads their grandparents helped grade by hand. Higher into the Pine Hills, Kingston tells a very different story, one that arrived all at once instead of fading slowly. Brick hotels, tall false fronts and broad porches were all built for a silver rush that burned out almost as fast as it arrived. a silver rush so loud hit here that the buildings it left behind are still too big for the people living in them now. When silver prices crashed, boarding houses sized for crowds were left with only a handful of year-round residents. So today's small community lives inside buildings designed for a boom that is long gone. People who stay now aren't chasing ore, but quiet mountain life, cool air, dark skies, and dirt streets under pine ridges, with the option of driving down for green chili and coffee before retreating back uphill. Those oversized porches and wide streets still earn their keep, now hosting potlucks, small festivals, and neighbour gatherings for a much smaller crowd. Out on the open plateau, shiprock breaks the flat horizon like nothing else for miles in any direction. A frozen volcanic throat, with dark stone wings running out from its base, pulls the whole horizon into a point out here. Long before paved roads, that spike worked as both compass and story anchor, guiding families across the flats while sitting at the centre of ceremonies, and origin tales they could see from distant camps. Climbing is banned not just for safety, but out of respect, because for many local people this is not scenery, but a relative in their stories, still woven into real prayers and rituals today. Modern drivers still navigate by eye as much as by GPS here, lining up back roads with that single spike on the skyline, then stopping nearby for fry bread, mutton stew, and chili. The basin past the volcanic spine holds the Cove Arch, a lone sandstone wall with a massive oval punched clean through it. No trail officially leads there, and most visitors find it by word of mouth, following unmarked ground, which makes arriving feel more like a discovery than a detour. It shifts personality by the hour, flat and pale at noon, then blazing orange at dusk while the desert around it fades to shadow. Ravens thread back and forth through the gap to catch wind currents, while swallows pack their nests into cracks just high enough that no snake or coyote can reach them. For Navajo families nearby, a place like this is less a tourist stop and more a quiet fixture of daily life. Somewhere you bring kids on a slow afternoon, then drive home for mutton stew or fry bread. The desert horn lizard is easy to miss down at the base of the wall, pressed so flat into the ground that it practically disappears between the stones. It moves in short bursts between tiny shade pockets, then drops flat and vacuums up red harvester ants like a living sand-coloured machine. If a predator keeps pushing, it squirts blood from the corners of its eyes, a foul surprise that sends some attackers stumbling away. That low, wide shape helps it warm fast on cool mornings, then sink into wind-scooped hollows when the afternoon sun turns brutal, using the sand as both heater and shield. Most hunters in this desert work by speed or strength, but the burrowing owl takes a different approach entirely, standing out in the open and letting the ground do most of the work. Instead of chasing prey from above, it stations itself at a burrow mouth on long legs like this whole flat patch of desert is its front yard, watching for anything that moves. It uses old prairie dog or ground squirrel tunnels, turning abandoned holes into cool day shelters and snug night nurseries. From that doorway it bobs and blinks, then suddenly sprints like a feathered meerkat, grabbing beetles, crickets and mice before they can vanish back underground. Daylight hunting comes with risk, so it leans on its sandy colour and long legs, freezing flat or darting into the tunnel the moment a hawk shadow cuts across. Pairs ring burrow mouths with cow dung to pull in insects and raise noisy chicks just inches below parked trucks and fence lines. On mine roads and grazing land near small towns, these owls watch from fence posts while people finish late shifts or pick up green chili burgers, desert and daily routine running side by side. The rusted head frame of Kelly Mine rises out of the scrub a little further on, marking a place where people once dug deep into this same ground for a very different reason. Old shafts drop away below the head frame, and the steel bones of the machine that once hauled silver out of the valley still stand over them, holding their shape long after the work stopped. The town that fed that machine has sunk to concrete pads, bottles and rust, yet families still drive out from nearby communities, walking the ruins with kids and snacks like a strange outdoor classroom. What makes Kelly unusual is that its biggest payday came not from silver at all, but from smithsonite, a zinc ore once dismissed as worthless rock, until a chemist realised the green-blue crystals were worth more than the silver under them. By the time the smelters in El Paso were paying premium for it, miners were pulling up tons of material their predecessors had thrown straight onto the waste pile. A different border town further south never had that second chance. A whole Route 66 main street still stands in Glen Rio, where motel doors, gas pumps and cafe stools wait for travellers who never arrive. Once the new interstate slid a few miles away, the cars, truckers and bus tours followed, and the town that lived on coffee, refills, tyre fixes and green chili plates simply ran out of customers. For families in nearby towns, this border stop has become a kind of open-air memory box, a place to bring kids, pose by silent signs, and talk about how their own lives still lean on roads and fuel stops. The state line itself runs straight through the middle of town, and that split caused real headaches for decades, with Texas side businesses serving alcohol, while the New Mexico side stayed dry, sending travellers a few feet east just for a drink. Past the cliffs west of town, a giant sandstone arch stands alone in the rock ahead. Wind scooped softer rock from inside that cliff face for centuries until only a harder rim remained, big enough for hawks and even eagles to glide through without folding their wings. La Ventana also bends the air, funneling a cool draft through the gap on hot days that pulls birds toward the opening as a shortcut between the canyon floor and cooler air above. For many New Mexico families, it's a favourite cheap weekend stop, park by the road, walk a short trail, then sit under the stone window with foil-wrapped burritos or green chili snacks. Look past that opening, and the eye climbs from scrub and sand to dark pine ridges in the distance, where desert stone trades places with cool high forest. The desert drops away fast once the road climbs into Lincoln National Forest, replaced by cool pine slopes, hidden springs and cliffs so high that clouds can sit below the ridges. A short drive here packs in what most places would need a full state to offer: scrub and red rock, giving way to forest, where springs feed steady creeks even in dry years. Fire and people are tied closely to this place, and early burns and logging in these ranges set the stage for the rescued bear cub that became Smokey Bear, turning one injured animal into a symbol for how these woods should be treated. Old logging corridors now carry hikers, hunters and families up from hot valley towns for snow days and campfire meals piled with green chili and tortillas. Along the steep outer cliffs at dusk, a line of aoudad pick across slopes so steep a person would need both hands just to stay upright. Brought in from far away, they now move like long-time locals, using rubbery hooves and heavy shoulders to climb loose limestone and canyon walls that elk and deer often avoid. Heat barely slows them down, their shaggy chest hair shedding rain and snow while they chew through tough grasses, thorny shrubs, and dry weeds that cattle ignore. Herds post lookouts on ledges, and at the first sign of danger, the whole group pours down rock faces in a flowing line, leaving most predators skidding and far behind. Their success splits opinion in New Mexico, bringing more chances for hunters and wildlife watchers, but adding competition for native bighorn sheep, already squeezed onto a few safe cliff systems. Up where they roam, the ground keeps rising into the Sierra Blanca range, a volcanic chain that holds snow long after the valley towns below are deep into summer. This chain sits high enough to hold ski runs above towns that bake in summer heat below, and a single drive here can take you from short sleeves on the valley floor to throwing snowballs under wind-bent pines. The Mescalero Apache tribe owns the upper mountain and operates Ski Apache from those peaks, making it one of the few major ski resorts in the country run entirely by a Native American tribe. Old eruptions built the soil that made all this possible, thick volcanic layers soaking up snowmelt and feeding cold springs that carry water down to farms and kitchens below. For nearby communities, these peaks mean cooler summer air, winter ski jobs, and a year-round reason to drive up for snow days and campfire meals. A Stellar's Jay landing above your lunch is often the loudest thing in the upper pines, and it has already decided what it can steal before it even touches down. This bird treats mountain visitors as moving snack dispensers, watching until a cooler opens or a chip bag crackles, then swooping in to grab crumbs, nuts, or even whole bread pieces. Copying hawk calls to clear smaller birds off a good spot, trailing predators to pick up leftovers, and remembering exactly which picnic tables usually pay out are all part of its daily routine. Life in thick conifers has shaped its body too, with strong wings and a broad tail, helping it thread through tight branches, and that tall crest sending signals to other jays about whether to advance or back off. Families driving up from hot valley towns quickly learn that eating outdoors here means sharing by default, as kids laugh and adults sigh, while jays argue over dropped tortilla bits and green chili crumbs. Follow their sharp calls uphill, and the trees open around Monjo Peak, a squat stone fire lookout planted right on the summit to watch the whole Sacramento range for smoke. From its rail you can turn in a slow circle and see cool pine ridges at your feet, dry valleys far below, and small towns strung along roads that pull people up here for cooler air. The lookout itself was built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps, using stone hauled up the mountain by mule, and the same building is still used during heavy fire seasons today. For many families, grinding up the rough road has become its own tradition, a place to eat foil-wrapped burritos on a tailgate while kids count peaks and learn that these forests are watched from above. Out in the foothills below, Hillsborough shows what happened when a mining camp ran at full speed and then learned to move at a fraction of that pace. It dodged the ghost town status by shrinking into one slow main street of adobe fronts, cottonwoods, and lived-in porches. When the big ore checks stopped, work shifted to ranching, art, and looking after travellers. So hills that once shook with blasting now hold quiet pastures, small orchards, and mule deer wandering past old stone walls. Stories still cling to these few blocks, floods that ripped through the creek, hold-ups on the road, and wild bar nights from boom times, now traded in softer voices on benches. Drivers tackle the twisty highway just to sit down for pie, coffee, and chili-heavy plates in rooms that once sold tools and whiskey to miners. Hillsborough stayed calm and small, but the sandier mountains show a different side of New Mexico. These mountains rise directly east of Albuquerque, with cool pine forest sitting right above the hot streets of the city. In a single short drive, you can go from cactus and dust in the basin to fir trees and sudden hail within an hour of leaving downtown. The steep face packs desert and mountain into tight bands, cactus and yucca at the foot, then oak and pinon, and finally true high timber near the top, almost like wildlife stacked on different floors of the same tall building. The granite cliffs on the west face are also one of the most popular climbing walls in the southwest, with routes first put up in the 1950s that climbers still repeat today. After dark, headlights glitter in the basin, while the upper ledges turn quiet enough to hear loose rocks fall hundreds of feet below. The road ends at Sandia Crest, a narrow spot where city basin and high, cool air sit side by side. Road, tram and trail all stop together here, city lights on one side and dark forest on the other. A few steps can feel like switching seasons, warm air rising from the basin behind you and sharp cold spilling off snow patches at your feet. People in Albuquerque use it like a pressure valve, racing up for cool air evenings, pulling jackets over t-shirts and sharing green chili snacks or hot drinks as the temperature drops far faster than it does in the streets below. The crest also sits along a major migratory flyway, and bird counters have logged more than 200 species moving past this single ridge in spring and fall. Once the last cars roll away and the chatter fades, the pines below the rim belong to a hunter so small most people walk right past it. The northern pygmy owl is only about soda can size, but it drops from low branches onto small birds and mice almost its own size that never expected such a small attacker. Hunting in daylight as well as dusk, it sits frozen on a twig and flashes dark eye spots on the back of its head to confuse enemies, so angry jays and chickadees can't tell which way it's really watching. Short wings allow sharp turns between trunks, thick feathers muffle wing noise, and nesting in old woodpecker holes keeps the clutch safe inside the trees. Most hikers never see it at all, they just hear its effect, as alarm calls ripple downslope when songbirds spot the hunter and pass the warning from branch to branch. Those quick strikes quietly trim small bird and rodent numbers around mountain towns, shaping which species crowd backyard feeders, while people focus on hot chocolate or green chili stew after a cold day hike. A different kind of danger once ruled the hills further north, where Elizabethtown earned its reputation in blood instead of timber. A gold camp that once held thousands, it burned through people faster than ore and ended badly for most. Saloons outnumbered everything else, the water scheme collapsed, and killings grew common enough that the camp earned a reputation for blood before it ever built a road out. One of the most infamous figures here was Charles Kennedy, a homesteader who confessed to killing dozens of travellers passing through his cabin, before locals dragged him out and hanged him from a corral gate. When the gold thinned, people walked away midlife, leaving tools on benches, bottles on bar tops, and buildings set for a workday that never came. Families from nearby Cimarron still drive up to walk the ruins, then return east where the land flattens out, and another kind of abandoned settlement waits. Duran was built as a steam-era rail stop, where crews lived on site to refill water tanks, clean fireboxes, and patch trains before they pushed on across the dry plains. When steam locomotives were replaced by diesel engines, the water towers became useless overnight, and the jobs that held this town together disappeared in a single shift change. A small Catholic church and a handful of stone storefronts still mark the main street, built when the place held enough people to fill a school, a bar, and a freight office all at once. Navajo Lake sits just past the open grass, fed year-round by cold mountain snowmelt, and cool enough to hold trout through summer. Fed by the San Juan River, the lake brought marinas, fishing lodges, and campgrounds to plateau country, where green chili breakfast burritos now sell faster than bait. Cold water makes this one of the top trophy trout spots in the state, which is hard to believe sitting in the middle of desert country. For Navajo families whose land borders these shores, the dam flooded canyon country and old use areas, and boat ramps now sit over submerged history people still talk about. On calm mornings before powerboats start up, osprey, bald eagles and great blue herons work the shoreline, drawn by fish that didn't exist here before the dam. Between them, western grebes glide across the surface without a ripple, before diving straight down, hunting in water that used to be dry scrubland. Before boats hit the water, a long-necked black and white bird glides quietly across the surface, like a needle across glass. It followed fish into the reservoir after the dam was built, pulled into a body of water that didn't exist a generation ago. Hunting means diving straight down, driving its sharp bill at fish too fast to react, then surfacing so cleanly it barely disturbs the water. Legs positioned so far back on its body make walking on land almost impossible, so it spends nearly its entire life on the water, building floating nests tied to reeds. During courtship, pairs run side by side across the open water on their feet before diving together, one of the most unusual displays of any bird on this lake. Drier country sits past the lake, where the streets go quiet in Cuchillo, a small adobe village that once kept wagon teams and miners going. Built as a supply stop between mining camps and trade routes, it stayed useful by giving travellers food, water and directions before they pushed into harder country. Very little has changed here, with the same narrow streets and low adobe homes still standing, and some families going back far enough that 4 generations walked the same dirt paths. Self-reliance runs through daily life, with backyard gardens, dried chili strings on porch beams, and home-cooked meals when the nearest store is a long drive away. The hills drop away after the village, and the Chihuahuan desert takes over, with water, shade, and the next town all spread out. Sitting above 3,500 feet, this is the highest desert floor in North America, and temperatures can swing 40 degrees between morning and night. Snow covers the same ground that bakes in July, and that extreme range is exactly why so many species here exist nowhere else on Earth. Water determined every settlement, ranch and trade route across this region, with communities built entirely around springs and creek crossings. Ranching families still work these flats the same way, moving cattle between water sources and stopping in small towns for green chili stew and strong coffee before heading back out. Dry creek beds can fill with fast-moving water within minutes on days that started with clear skies, catching drivers and hikers off guard. underground gypsum deposits have been slowly dissolving for a long time, and at one low point in the basin, all that white mineral has built up into something that looks more like a snowfield than a desert floor. At that low point, the ground at White Sands is covered in gypsum, a soft mineral that washed down from surrounding mountains, collected, dried out, and broke into white crystals now covering 275 square miles. Gypsum stays cool under direct sun, so families walk barefoot here in mid-July without burning their feet, making it one of the few desert spots where people actually picnic and sled in summer. Some dunes shift up to 30 feet a year, burying fence posts and uncovering them on the other side completely intact. Bleached earless lizards evolved near white colouring to match the gypsum surface, while the same species living just outside the dune field stays noticeably darker. Missile tests from a nearby range have shut the park down many times without warning, with visitors held at the gate while rockets pass overhead. Deeper underground, Carlsbad Cavern sits buried under the desert floor, opening into rooms so large that early visitors thought they had found another world. The main chamber sits 750 feet down and holds a steady 56 degrees year-round, so visitors bring jackets in the middle of summer. It was formed by sulfuric acid eating upward through the rock from below, not by water dissolving downward, making it one of the few caves on Earth formed this way. A cowboy discovered it after seeing what looked like smoke coming out of the ground, but it wasn't smoke, it was bats coming out in a column that took nearly 2 hours to clear. Local ranchers once collected bat droppings from the cave floor by the ton and sold them as fertiliser, meaning the cave was first valued for its poop, not its scenery. Where the dunes give way to scrub and grass, that pale colouring stops working, and the American robin takes over. It moves through shrubs, dry washes, and grassy patches across New Mexico, shifting between low ground and cooler hillsides depending on the season. Around homes, it has learned that sprinklers and garden hoses soften the soil, so it shows up on lawns at dawn and pulls up prey using sound and small ground movements. Robins also raid fruit trees, chili patches, and berry bushes near restaurants, treating gardens and parking lot edges as reliable food stops. Nests turn up on porch lights, street signs, patio beams, and gas station overhangs, so local families often watch chicks grow a few feet above where they drink their morning coffee. Their calls are common enough in towns across the region that for many people the first one at dawn has become part of the daily routine, mixed in with traffic and church bells. Those calls stop at the wall of stone rising east of Las Cruces, where the Organ Mountains split the weather so completely that one side can be soaked while the other stays dry. The peaks here are named after a pipe organ, since the line of granite spires along the ridge actually looks like the pipe standing in a cathedral when seen from the valley floor. Some winter mornings bring snow to the peaks, while people eat breakfast burritos in t-shirts below, and the ridge holds enough moisture to keep chili fields and pecan orchards going through dry months. Stories about outlaws, hidden passes, and unexplained lights on the slopes still come up locally, and rescue crews go up every year after hikers caught off guard by how fast conditions change on those ridges. That skyline once marked where drivers stopped for fuel and green chili smothered fries before pushing on toward Cuervo. Route 66 once brought steady traffic through, with road trippers and truckers stopping for food and fuel, but faster interstates let drivers skip the town entirely, and it never recovered. A few people still live here, trading city jobs for cheap land, quiet skies, and a small handful of neighbours. Interstate 40 actually cut the town in half when it was built, leaving the north and south sides connected only by a single underpass, and most of the southern half has been empty for decades. A different kind of refuge takes over at Bosque del Apache, where winter fields fill with cranes and geese instead of empty dry lots. Shallow ponds and flooded fields are managed here on purpose, refilled each season so migrating birds have a place to stop, rest and feed. Corn and grain are grown on site and used as food for the birds passing through, not for local markets. Each winter, birdwatchers fill the motels in nearby San Antonio, lining up before dawn to watch the marsh go from quiet to thousands of birds rising at once. The refuge was actually built on top of an old Spanish land grant, where farmers struggled for centuries because the Rio Grande kept flooding their fields, and what ruined their crops is the exact thing that now keeps the birds coming back. Flocks have learned that this patch of water is safe, and that familiarity is why so many birds return to it every winter instead of scattering across the region. As mist lifts off the water and the noise builds, sandhill cranes form tight family groups and begin calling across the ponds, getting ready to lift off. Tall and grey, they stand in the cold water testing the air with low calls before lifting off together over the flooded fields. For families living nearby, the cranes share the water with chili fields and hay crops, and the sound of their calls has become tied to the local harvest season. Bird watchers line the dike paths in heavy jackets with coffee and breakfast in hand, watching the cranes call and move overhead in loose formations. A single bird jumping early can set off a chain reaction, sending large groups into the air all at once before they circle and settle back down. For families living nearby, the cranes share the water with chili fields and hay crops, and the sound of their calls has become tied to the local harvest season. Behind those grey shapes, a crowd of snow geese fills the shallows, packed so tightly the pond seems to disappear under a sheet of white birds. White and loud, they pack into the pond so tightly that the water underneath them disappears. They use this refuge as a feeding stop, loading up on corn and roots in flooded fields before taking off in large groups the moment a predator moves at the edge. One bird spooked sends tens of thousands into the air within seconds, flashing white and dark as the flock turns together. Their strong bills are built for digging through cold mud, and the time spent here is used to build up fat for colder nights and longer flights ahead. Kids in nearby towns recognise goose mornings by the sound alone, and families time early breakfasts around the best flyouts at sunrise. Predators work the edges looking for slower birds, so staying tightly grouped is what keeps most of the flock from getting picked apart. As the geese clear the marsh and head north, attention shifts to Los Chirrillos, a near ghost town that survived by turning its old mining buildings into art spaces and studios. Old turquoise and silver offices here now hold art studios, small homes, and shops selling the same stones once pulled from nearby shafts. Locals moved into empty company buildings and turned bunkhouses into weekend galleries instead of letting the town fade, and ravens and cottontails still move through the same dusty alleys. Film crews and artists come for the cracked streets and old storefronts, and the town now earns more from looking historic on camera than it ever made from mining. People here trade grocery stores for backyard chili patches, small cafes and local markets, and some of the turquoise jewellery on sale was made within a few doors of the mine it came from. Many other silver camps never adjusted, and chloride is the most straightforward example, as a town that stopped almost overnight when the silver ran out and most people left for good. Wooden storefronts here still look nearly the same as the week silver prices crashed and the town's income disappeared. Most people left without taking much, leaving barber chairs, ledgers, canned goods and tools where they sat, so some rooms feel less like a museum and more like a house no one came back to. A small group stayed and turned the old offices and boarding houses into tiny museums and guest rooms, keeping the original structures upright instead of letting them collapse. Potlucks, pie sales and chili cook-offs now fill rooms that once handled mining payroll, and kids play among ore wagons and old stamp mill parts. For many families from the region, the quiet and the real history are worth the drive, and they come for weekend visits, home-cooked food, and stories from people who actually live there. Past the last building, open desert takes over, and the route leads to Ojito Wilderness. Dirt roads thin to almost nothing here, giving way to a pale stretch of mesas and stone fins shaped by wind and flash floods. A single storm can push fast water through dry channels within minutes, cutting new paths and leaving behind logs, roots and bones as signs the ground is still moving. One of the largest dinosaur skeletons ever found in New Mexico, a long-necked Seismosaurus, weighing roughly 30 tons in life, was pulled out of these badlands across more than a decade of digging. Visitors are rare enough that fresh footprints stand out, and the ones who do come haul in their own water and stay for the rock formations and the dark sky. For nearby families, this empty badland works as a backyard getaway, a place for tailgate meals, coyote sounds and quiet that makes even a distant truck sound close. North of here, the flat desert begins to climb, rising into the cold upper ridges of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, where the southern Rockies come in as a wall of forest and snow. The range suddenly stands up from the flat desert with dark spruce, deep snow, and ridges sharp enough to split storm clouds. Mountain passes connecting towns like Taos and Mora can close under several feet of snow, cutting off supply routes for weeks at a time. High elevation villages lean on comfort food through long freezes, with red chili ristras on porch beams, pozole on the stove, and green chili stews locals swear beat any ski lodge meal. The name comes from the way the peaks flush red at sunset, a colour that still makes drivers pull over just to watch the light slide down the snow. All that height collects on one summit, the state's highest point, rising above dark timber, alpine lakes and cold basins that hold snow long after the low desert dries out. Air at Wheeler is so thin that ravens drift below you, and distant storms flash on the plains like someone else's problem. Above the Las Firs, trees simply stop, and only short grass, tiny cushion plants and burrowing rodents hang on, built for hard wind and nights that freeze, while towns below sit outside with ice cream. For many families, this summit is a rite of passage, with people returning in chilly caps and worn boots, talking about that one clear day the way others talk about finishing a big race. Snow on this ridge feeds the creeks that run back toward farms and chili fields, so the view from the top is really about the water that keeps small towns going. A cold alpine lake catches that snowmelt just below the ridge, mirroring the rock walls above. Williams Lake Basin sits under cliffs so steep that in heavy winters, loose snow can slide almost straight into the water. Snowmelt keeps it icy, even when Taos bakes, and cutthroat trout cruise the shallows, so some hikers haul up rods and joke that this little bowl feeds both their legs and their dinner. Around the shore, pika and marmots dash between boulders with mouthfuls of grass they dry on warm stones, building tiny haystacks to last through winter. As light fades and people drop back toward lodges below, the basin hands over to the grey fox, a hunter that slips through timber and rock on its own high country routes. It moves along logs so quietly, you see the tail's outline before you hear a step, weaving through rocks to grab voles and small birds. When quick hunts fail, it switches to berries, beetles, or a forgotten crust at a campsite, wasting almost nothing. Of all foxes in this region, it is the only one that climbs, using sharp claws and a light body to scramble up leaning trunks to raid nests or scan for danger. Near mountain towns, it is more rumour than animal, a cat-sized shadow crossing driveways at dusk, slipping between wood piles and sheds before disappearing. Moving off the slopes, it threads between cactus, old rail beds, and rusting cars in the dry basins below. Empty tracks become hunting lanes, with culverts and bridge shadows used as cool tunnels where lizards and pack rats hide from the sun. That rail line eventually reaches Steins, a desert-side stop that briefly flourished on passing trains before emptying when the traffic and the money moved on. Almost every porch and bunkhouse here existed just to feed Southern Pacific crews. When engines improved and stops vanished, families fled so fast that plates, toys, and coats stayed on hooks like a scene paused mid-movie. A few people later returned not to revive the town, but to guard this freeze frame, walking curious travellers through sagging storefronts instead of building a glossy Western theme park. The last private caretaker was actually murdered in his cabin in 2011, and the unsolved case kept the town closed to visitors for years afterward. Life in New Mexico can feel like a stubborn decision to stay where others walked away, and Madrid Village took that stubbornness further, swapping coal dust for art and cafe culture instead of shutting the lights off. Company shacks were painted bright instead of bulldozed, turned into tight rows of galleries and cafes. Old mine offices now serve coffee and stacked green chili plates, and locals joke that art and chili heat replaced coal as the fuel, pulling weekend crowds from nearby towns. The town was actually sold off in one piece in 1954 for $250,000 when the coal market collapsed, and the buyer couldn't find takers until artists started moving in 2 decades later. If a coal camp could trade hard hats for paintbrushes and roadside pie, then Albuquerque had to find its own way to grow from farm fields into a wide desert city without losing older roots. A former riverside farm town, it spread along the Rio Grande fast enough that old adobe courtyards now hide inside modern blocks. Blue corn enchiladas and green chili stew sit on the menu in a centuries-old plaza, and just outside, neon lights, taco trucks, and lowriders glide past like slow chrome lizards. Life here bends around heat and water, with families planting shade trees against flat roofs and flood control channels doubling as bike paths through the middle of the city. Evenings follow the sky with people timing walks and chili roasting, to the short moment when the sandias turn watermelon pink. Locals argue cheerfully over red or green chili on burritos, tacos, and cheeseburgers, and that small question, red, green, or Christmas, quietly splits visitors from those who truly live here. The city is also one of the only places where you can find a bowl of green chili stew at a Michelin-recognised restaurant and at a gas station counter on the same block, both serving the same recipe their grandmothers used. Each October, the city becomes the launch site for one of the largest aviation events anywhere, when hundreds of hot air balloons fill the sky over the Rio Grande Valley. The Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta started in 1972 with just 13 balloons launching from a shopping mall parking lot, organised as a small birthday promotion for a local radio station. It has run every year since and grown into a 9-day event with more than 500 balloons and roughly 800,000 visitors, making it the largest hot air balloon festival in the world. Pilots ride the Albuquerque box, a wind pattern that carries balloons one way low and back the other way higher up, so some riders float over the same streets twice without steering. This wind pattern is so reliable and so rare globally that it is the entire reason the Fiesta is held here, instead of a dozen other cities that tried to host similar events and failed. On the grass, families wrapped in blankets eat breakfast burritos and green chili breads in the dark, joking that this is the only traffic jam where every head tilts to the sky. For many locals, showing up feels like a yearly check-in with the sky, pulling office workers, farmers, students and artists into the same cool morning air. When the last balloons drift off and the valley calms, people head back toward Albuquerque Old Town. Low adobe walls, shaded walkways, and a small plaza older than traffic lights make up most of what you find here. The plaza was laid out in 1706 by Spanish colonists, and the same street grid is still in use today, with property lines that have not shifted in over 300 years. For most of its history, this was actually the entire city, and modern downtown Albuquerque only grew up 2 miles east after the railroad arrived in 1880 and bypassed Old Town entirely. That bypass turned out to be the reason it survived, since the railroad money and modern construction went somewhere else, leaving the original adobes standing. All these threads tighten around San Felipe de Neri Church, on one side of the plaza, where thick walls and steady bells still mark time for a community that now fans far beyond these first streets. Thick adobe walls here still shelter people, the same way they sheltered early farmers, escaping the heat while they prayed and traded. The original 1706 church actually collapsed in heavy rain, and the current building was rebuilt in 1793 on the same spot, making it one of the oldest continuously operating churches in the country. Feast days spill into the square with tamales, sweet empanadas and chili stews, turning church time into a food-heavy gathering that keeps families rooted in this bright, dry city. Kids loop from pews to benches to candy stalls in a few steps, so faith here feels less like a rule and more like a shared habit tied to flavour and routine. The walls tell a survival story too, with sun-dried adobe showing how people learned to trap cool air with local mud, straw, and timber long before fans existed. A harsher side of mining waits out west at Fierro, where comfort and community give way to broken ore yards and rusted machinery. Whole hillsides once turned into roaring ore chutes, crushers and towers so dominant that saloons and cabins felt like an afterthought. Those frames now sag over rubble and stained ground, the bones of an iron ore operation that fed the smelters at nearby Hanover for decades. The name itself means iron in Spanish, and the red-orange staining on the ground still marks where massive ore piles sat waiting for shipment. When the iron market dropped and the railroad spur was pulled out, the town emptied in less than 2 years, with the last company houses sold off for scrap lumber. One county over, Lake Valley briefly turned an empty grid into a boomtown before running dry and leaving almost nothing behind. The boom here came from one underground pocket of native silver so thick that miners could slice slabs straight from the walls with almost no extra work. That pocket, called the Bridal Chamber, produced an estimated $3 million in silver in just a few years, with some sections so pure that miners reportedly worked by candlelight reflecting off solid silver walls. Ore dropped off so fast that the town never filled its grid, leaving broad streets and solid buildings without the shops, schools or chili cafes that hook people in other New Mexico towns. For many families, a place like this is a quiet warning, shared over coffee and green chili, that chasing one lucky strike can leave you with good walls but no neighbours. That kind of layered history runs even deeper where Pecos National Historical Park sits. A ruined pueblo that once controlled this mountain pass sits right next to a Spanish church shell built almost on top of it, like one town trying on another. The same gap in the hills later funneled Santa Fe trail wagons and Civil War troops, stacking ox ruts, wagon lines and boot paths into a single grassy track. The 1862 Battle of Glorieta Pass, sometimes called the Gettysburg of the West, was fought just up the road and effectively ended the Confederate invasion of the New Mexico Territory in a single afternoon. For people in New Mexico, places like this explain why life feels layered, with pueblos, churches, ranches, and green chili cafes sharing the same roads but new reasons to stay. Over all of it, a red-tailed hawk circles the ruins and fields, gliding along that old travel line while it watches for movement below. From that height, it picks out a mouse by a church wall or a prairie dog on a pueblo mound, turning broken stone and old ruts into a hunting map. It leans on warm valley winds as free lifts, holding its broad wings almost still while rising air does most of the work. Fence posts, road signs, and even parked cars work as launch pads for sudden dives, and it uses them without any concern for traffic or noise. Snakes, ground squirrels, and rabbits drop in number where these hunters settle, quietly helping farms and small towns keep crop raiders in check. Parents raise chicks on nearby cliffs and tall cottonwoods, bringing strips of rodent and teaching young birds to follow the same open corridors people use for roads and fields. A far deadlier threat waited underground at Dawson, where families climbed into the mountains for coal pay and ran into one of New Mexico's worst industrial disasters. Families here traded safety for coal pay inside a mountain mine that grew faster than anyone could control. Two separate blasts, years apart, tore through the same tunnels and killed hundreds in single mornings, turning one small town into one of New Mexico's deadliest work sites. The 1913 explosion killed 263 men, most of them Italian and Greek immigrants who had been recruited directly from Europe with promises of steady work and company housing. Mining started again after the first disaster, and many stayed because steady wages, company houses, and a full plate of beans and chili were hard to match anywhere else. When coal demand crashed, the owner pulled out, stripped most homes and shops, and left cemetery rows, concrete pads, and rusted scraps behind. Out in different country entirely, the Valley of Dreams shows what New Mexico looks like when no one ever tried to settle at all. No town ever held here, just warped clay ridges and stone fins, where a house would sit like a teacup on a pile of plates. One hard rain can cut new gullies overnight, so the basin keeps its raw erosion almost untouched. The formations here are made of bentonite clay, the same material used in cat litter, which is exactly why nothing builds permanent shape, and why water turns the ground into a slick paste in seconds. For people in nearby towns, this empty pocket is a blunt lesson that life in New Mexico often means living just outside danger, close enough to visit and far enough to enjoy chili and cold drinks at home. Outlaws and drifters once cut across country. Like this, looking for hideouts, and white oak sits on that kind of ground. Scattered homes and an old jail-marked ground where miners, cattlemen, and gunmen once shared the same short strip of street. During the Lincoln County years, feuds and gunfights decided who held the cattle, the gold, and even which saloon stayed open. Billy the Kid himself was a regular visitor here, and local legend says he avoided the town toward the end of his life, specifically because residents had warned him they would shoot on sight if he came back. Families stayed through all that because steady ore, nearby grazing, and a plate of beans and red chili at a familiar table felt safer than gambling on some distant start. A very different kind of struggle plays out at Fort Union, where soldiers spent more energy moving supplies than fighting anyone. Crumbling walls spread out across open prairie, where the army tried to control something tougher than gunfights, non-stop wagon traffic on open land. It worked like a giant storeroom, stacking food, gunpowder, uniforms and wagon parts so freighters could roll in light and leave heavy. At its peak, this was the largest military post in the American Southwest, with a hospital, a printing press, and warehouses big enough to supply every army outpost in New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Texas. Delays mattered more than raids, because one missing load could leave distant towns short on flour, coffee, and the chili and beans meals people built their days around. On quiet afternoons, the loudest thing is often a western meadowlark on a post or broken wall, tossing its bright song across the same open corridor soldiers once fought to keep moving. From that perch, it picks off beetles, grasshoppers, and seeds in the short turf, cutting pests that now nip at hay and pasture people need for cattle. That bright yellow chest works like a signal flare, letting mates spot each other fast across flat ground without long display flights. Nests stay tucked low in the grass, where wide views give parents a better chance to spot a sneaking coyote or snake and lure it away. Singing from broken adobe edges, it turns crumbling walls into stages that carry its call far over the grassland, so the ruins stay loud long after the soldiers left. For many people in New Mexico, that clear song ties town life and plates of green chili and beef back to the fields that feed their herds. That sound carries toward Loma Parda, where a nearly vanished village once turned passing army traffic into one of the rowdiest boom stops on the route. The army banned troops from crossing the Mora River to get there, but with whiskey, card games, and hot food on the other bank, that order held about as well as a screen door in a dust storm. The town earned the nickname Sodom on the Mora for its reputation, and military records show soldiers regularly went AWOL just to spend a weekend at the saloons and dance halls across the river. The same village held tight families who built a proper church above it all, cooked pozole and fresh tortillas on feast days, and kept ordinary life running while chaos worked below. When the army post closed, every reason to stay vanished almost overnight, leaving only foundations, one standing church, and cottonwood roots splitting what walls remained. A very different kind of building happened at Bandelier, where people built entire homes into canyon cliffs long before any fort or saloon existed. Families here pressed rooms for sleeping, storage, and cooking, directly into soft volcanic cliffs, and stayed for generations. The rock, called tuff, is light enough to work with stone tools, and some of those rooms still hold black soot lines on their ceilings from cooking fires, marks that have outlasted most towns ever built in New Mexico. A massive volcanic eruption nearby actually helped the canyon by sealing soil layers under thick ash, pushing people to sharpen their food storage and farming rather than leave. Some families occupied the same room for so many generations that the floors were replastered dozens of times, each mud layer stacked directly on the last. Up in the pines above, a steady hammering gives away the next resident, working tree trunks with the same focused drive the cliff builders once aimed at the rock face below. The hairy woodpecker hammers about 20 times a second without scrambling its brain, a rate fast enough to drill through bark that would split a human knuckle. That pounding works because the head is built like a shock pad, with thick bone and a long tongue wrapped around the skull to soak up each hit. In these pine and canyon woods, it homes in on dead or sick trees, listening for beetle grubs under the bark and drilling a tight hole to hook them out. Many other animals move in afterward, using its old drill holes as ready-made nest boxes when they cannot dig their own. One bird can quietly shift which creatures hold ground in a patch of forest just by choosing which trunks to work through in a season. Many pairs stay on the same slope all year, acting as full-time pest control and keeping bark beetles from killing the pines that shelter canyon communities below. That same drive to dig into wood and stone for survival leads to Golden, where early fortune hunters once tore into nearby hills chasing one of the earliest gold discoveries in the region. One of the first big gold finds west of the Mississippi turned quiet hills into a scramble of shovels, stamp mills, and tents. The strike here predates the famous California Rush by nearly 2 decades, making this one of the very first gold towns in the entire western half of the country. For a short time, this tiny spot outran bigger towns, with ore wagons, false front stores, and loud saloons all feeding off the same gullies where flakes once washed from the sand. When the veins proved thin and jumpy, many miners stayed, turning to small ranches, nearby markets and steady plates of beans, chili, and tortillas instead of camp rations. A small adobe church built by those staying families still holds Sunday services today, and it remains one of the oldest, continually active houses of worship in the entire region. Santa Fe absorbed all those layered stories, taking in gold seekers, ranch families and traders, and turning boom and bust ground into a lasting capital. This place grew from a trail stop into the long-term mind of New Mexico, and it still feels like the place where boomtown stories finally report in. Founded in 1610, it is the oldest state capital in the country, predating the founding of Boston by 20 years and Plymouth by a decade. A shaded square that once held wagon trains now packs in art blankets, chili stalls, and families using it as a shared living room. Government offices sit steps from jewellery sellers and food carts, so big meetings and small haggles over turquoise or roasted corn unfold on the same blocks. Red and green chili, blue corn, and slow stews pull ranch hands, artists, and office workers back to the same cafes again and again. Old trails once funneled wool, ore, and news into this plaza, and now highways and flights do the same, so people from small desert towns still say they are going to town when they mean coming here. Many locals pay bills or join protests in the morning, then line up for chili-smothered burritos or tamales at lunch, moving between quiet streets and this square like it is one long routine. Just beyond the plaza, the stone front of the Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi rises over the adobe roofs. Its tall Romanesque front breaks the low line of adobe streets like a stone shock. Instead of flat mud walls, there are arched windows and pale stone towers built from nearby hills, so this corner feels a little European and very New Mexican at the same time. The cathedral was built around an older adobe church that still survives inside its walls, with the original 1714 chapel preserved as a side room rather than torn down during construction. Protests, lowriders and tourists carrying ice cream pass these doors daily, while locals still slip inside for candles, weddings, or a cool break from the high sun. For many residents, the building matters less as fancy stonework and more as proof that faith, food and city politics can share the same tight streets without pushing each other out. A short walk downhill from those towers leads to the New Mexico state capitol, a round building where laws are argued in a space shaped more like the sun than a castle. Its circle lines up with 4 main entrances like a giant compass, nodding to indigenous ideas of direction and balance, while lawmakers hurry through with laptops and coffee. Corridors that could be plain offices are packed with local art, so choices about water, land and schools are made under murals and textiles from the people those laws touch. In those hearing rooms, ranchers in dusty boots, tribal leaders in beaded jewellery, and city staff in suits argue over whether small towns keep their wells, classrooms and chili fields. Talk of bills and budgets fades a few steps away, with the hanging red chili peppers on adobe walls, reminding everyone that in Santa Fe, power always sits close to the flavours people live for. Each ristra begins as fresh valley pods, threaded and dried in the high sun so families can grind them into sauces, stews, and that sharp red chili poured over almost everything. Those hanging peppers also act as quiet good luck signs, a promise that guests will be fed and that flavour will carry the house through winter. The tradition predates electricity in New Mexico, with the high desert sun and dry air making porch beams the original food preservation system long before refrigeration arrived. For many people in New Mexico, these red ropes say what signs can't, that power may sit in offices and old churches, but everyday life still turns around chili on the wall, on the stove, and on the plate. This is New Mexico, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of Minnesota, check out this video.